Under the open bowl of the sky, the Dragonpit breathed dust. The sun leaned toward late day and made long shadows of men on broken stone. Grass, dry and stubborn, pushed from cracks in marble steps once veined and gleaming. Ravens turned slow circles overhead as if choosing which figure below would die soonest. The place remembered fires that could melt stone and bend iron, and it remembered chains and the sound beasts make when they do not understand why they were born to a world that binds them. The ruin wore that memory like a cowl. 2 gate towers slumped to either side of the oval, and half the shell of the dome cut a black shape across the sky, an old scab on the city. A wind made from heat and harbor stink came up the slope, shivering the torn banners hung for show. King's Landing glimmered in the distance, red roofs and pale walls and the dark needle of the September's missing absence savaging the skyline. Sandor Clegane dragged an iron-bound crate over the stones as if he meant to root a furrow. The thing inside skittered and hissed, clawing, and the sound went into bone. He shoved it down on a flat place near the center and set a boot to hold it. He looked at the Lannister guards lined along one side and the Unsullied across from them, then at the space where a queen should be and wasn't yet. Sweat darkened the scars along his jaw. He didn't like this place. He didn't like any place where his brother stood still and silent as a tomb statue, dull eyes behind a visor that never lifted, a monster with a man's shape. Bronn of the Blackwater, clever slouch disguising his readiness, guided Jaime Lannister toward the best shade. Tyrion already watched his brother, and there was a pause in his breath when those green eyes flicked to meet his. It had been years since the last time they'd embraced like brothers, before swords and fathers and trials had come between them, before all that folded itself into silence that never sat comfortably. Tyrion rubbed at the scar. Tyrion drank from a wineskin, then capped it when he saw Cersei coming through the ruins like a moving shard of glass. She wore black against the heat. It suited her, as if sunlight avoided her by agreement. Qyburn slithered at her shoulder. Euron Greyjoy walked with a swagger that only men who had killed their kin and laughed could manage. Guards fell into their places like stitches. Ser Gregor loomed. The wind brought the smell of the Blackwater and the narrower stink beneath it that never left the city no matter who sat the throne. Jon Snow breathed and tasted salt and dust. A gull cried from somewhere beyond, and the sound was wrong in this place. He had dressed for the north and for the hunt, hard boots, furs, plain leather scuffed by honest travel. He wore Longclaw. Ghost was not here. It bothered him more than it should, that blank space at his side where a presence usually lived. Davos stood at his back like a quay piling, and the hound's crate clawed and thumped against iron, and Jon's heart beat steady and slow in his chest because it had to. He had left a crown behind when he came south. He had left the smell of pine and cold river and thick bread. He had left his sister's steady voice in the great hall and the way Arya's eyes cut sharper than knives. He had brought with him a truth that none of these people had truly understood until they saw dead fingers reach for their eyes and their mouths. They waited on Daenerys because everyone waited on Daenerys now. They felt her in the way horses stamped and rolled their eyes, and the way Euron tilted his head to listen for a sound only he could hear coming. When it came, it was the sound of air being ripped open. Shadows crossed the pit. Drogon and Rhaegal folded the sun for a heartbeat, then landed with a thunder of muscle and wing, scales like wet coal catching firelight that wasn't there. The dragons set themselves along the rim, haunches and tails curling, and when Daenerys dismounted from the Great Black, she did it like a queen who knew the ground would hold because she willed it. When her foot touched stone, Missandei of Noth bowed very slightly, every movement measured. Jorah Mormont, jaw set around a devotion that remained a soft thing in a hard man, stepped forward and then back, making a place where words could be exchanged without steel. Grey Worm watched the Lannister line with the same expression he would show a bare field, the calculation always unfinished in his eyes. Tyrion came to her side and said something low. The light at his eye's corner told Jon it was meant to be reassurance and turned into apology before it left the mouth. Cersei didn't incline her head to either dragon or woman. She didn't need to. That was the meaning of a crown. Her mouth made a thin line and stayed there. They had come to speak of the dead. Jon had spent weeks crafting the shape of sentences that could be stamped into these hard southern coins. Felt like trying to nail mist to a door. He saw a woman whose father had burned men alive for feet of a dream of dragons, and another woman who had walked through fire and come out changed. And he saw a city that would laugh and sing and eat and fuck itself stupid on any given afternoon while the end of the world queued outside its gate. The hound kicked the crate and opened it. The thing inside exploded upward like a thrown net. The white fell on its hands, fingers clawing at stone, mouth open as if it were an exhausted runner only now allowed breath. Came at Cersei fast. Men raised spears. Qyburn sounded like a boy watching a magician lay out a trick with knives. Jon reached without thinking and the weight of Longclaw steadied his hand. But Sandor was quicker and jerked the chain, dragging the white short. Clawed air. The jaws opened and shut, made a wet clack. Its eyes were blue like water over stone. The North had 100,000 just like it waiting to kill men who had never seen a winter that lasted longer. On a king's feast, there was a moment in which all the unspoken things in the pit, old betrayals, loves, and dogs that should have bitten years ago, were forced aside by simple animal horror. The white fought. Jon stepped up and with neat, practiced cuts showed them the truth. The severed hand kept moving until flame took it, and when the hound's greatsword split the rotten chest, the thing kept trying to stand until dragon glass kissed it and death finally took the death. Silence came like the first fall of snow. Felt clean and dangerous. This is what we face, Jon said. He did not have a voice for speeches. He had a voice for hailing men on a cold morning and for speaking the truth as if he did not own it. It doesn't kneel. It doesn't want your cities. It doesn't care who your father was. It does not stop. He looked to each queen in turn. We ask for your help to fight it. Only that. The plan had been to stop there. Let Tyrion nudge. Let sense find its way into people who had built their lives on anything else. But he had lain awake on a ship for nights listening to ropes creak and boards speak to one another in the tongue of the sea, and had seen the faces of the men who would die to honor promises they did not understand. The North had named him their king because they were tired of kneeling to strangers who forgot them when summer came. If he walked back a vassal in all but name, he would cut the heart from them and call it a cure. He placed his hand on Longclaw's pommel until the leather creaked. There is one more thing. He felt Davos's attention sharpen at his shoulder. Tyrion's head turned, quick as a fox scenting smoke. He saw Daenerys lift her chin by the length of a breath. Jon swallowed as if the words were ice. The North will fight this war as your ally, but we will not be subjects after. When this is done, if we live through it, the North will be its own. The ancient oaths ended when the Boltons burned Winterfell and the Iron Throne did nothing. We will not return to something that became ash years ago. Cersei's lips curved, not into a smile but into an idea of one. Euron threw back his head and laughed and then stopped when no one joined him. Qyburn's quill scratched in the air, the habit of a man always taking notes when the world surprised him. Jaime's eyes shot to Tyrion's as if asking if he'd known of this. Brienne of Tarth stood as straight as a spear and did not blink, but her jaw flexed, thinking of oaths and the shape of them. The mountain did not move, but then the dead rarely did until asked. Daenerys's look did not change. That frightened him more than anger would have. He heard in his head the breath she had taken in his sick room on the rocking ship. He had called her his queen then, because honor could sometimes only be measured by the knife it pressed hard against the ribs. Her hand now was easy at her side, but the knuckles had gone white. The dragons above fed the air with a slow, furnace breath. Tyrion stepped forward before swords filled the silence. We came to ask for a truce and to offer one. He spoke in that careful manner he used when he meant to lead a room through a doorway and let them believe they chose it. The living can settle their borders after the dead are dead. But the king in the north speaks for a people whose faith in thrones has thinned. A promise made here, before gods and men and ruin, costs nothing now and may by much later. Cersei laughed softly this time. A promise costs exactly what it forces you to admit, she said. Her voice pricked as nettles. You would have me concede a slice of my realm before this foreign queen has even the wit to take any of it? I have fought to hold the 7 kingdoms together. Now the wolf pup demands I let him tear off a limb while the dragons purr. You speak as if the north were your limb, Jon said. Came without heat. We are not. Daenerys spoke, and the wind seemed to listen. The 7 kingdoms are not 7 only when they flatter themselves with songs. The veins stood at her throat. I crossed the world for the throne my family built and lost. I mean to break the wheel that has ground people under it for 300 years. Breaking it will not happen if every lord who feels slighted takes a piece for himself to hold until he is flattered enough to call it fair. If you mean to break the wheel, Jon said, pulse loud behind each word, then do not force the spokes that never turned it to keep going. My people kept to their own during kings' quarrels and paid with sons when southern storms swept north. Let us keep to it again when it is done, and you will have allies, not subjects who wait for you to choke. They watched each other across a space maybe 20 feet wide and as deep as the memory of the old world. Tyrion had known it might come to this. He had not known it would come here. If it happened at all, it should have happened in a tent, with poor wine and tired guards, not in a ruin built for show. Cersei moved first. She turned on her heel and started toward the arch she had claimed as a throne, then checked herself, looked back over her shoulder, and let the frost in her sharply lovely face melt a little. I am not in the habit of granting favors to wolves, she said, but I can be prudent. My army will not march north. Not while this foreign queen plots to take my home once my men die in the cold. However, she let the word fall like a new blade. If the king in the north declares neutrality in the war between us, and if the north accepts recognition as part of that, I will acknowledge the north's freedom when the dead are dealt with. Let the wolf hide in his woods. Let him keep his old songs. Keep your dragons pointed at snow and not at my city. She turned to Daenerys. You, meanwhile, can continue your charming struggle with your conscience. I have one realm to hold together. You have none. Perhaps the wolf's leash might improve your odds. Jon felt age climb like heat under armor. It would be so easy to say no and doom thousands. It would be easy to say yes and doom something else he loved as deeply. He opened his mouth. Tyrion got there first. No one is hiding, he said mildly, and no leash is needed. The threat we brought you from the trapped cold of the world will march whether the north is independent, indifferent, or enslaved to your whims. He let his gaze slide to Qyburn. You have men of learning if your companion counts as one. He will tell you that this is not the moment to bargain as if you were buying pepper. Qyburn dipped his head slightly. Even pepper can be dear at the wrong time. My men will not march north, Cersei repeated. But if the north remains out of the fight for this city forever after, I will recognize their old pretensions once you've made yourself useful ending this unpleasantness. The alternative is that we all do what we mean to do anyway. Fight to the end for what is ours. Daenerys had not taken her eyes off Jon. You will make no deals with her on the North's behalf, she said, soft enough only men listening for the sound of a sword leaving a scabbard would hear. If there is a sovereign here, it is not the woman who destroyed her own city and calls the ruin mercy. She destroyed her enemies, not her city? Tyrion murmured, and for his pains earned from Bronn a look that meant shut up, Lannister. You say another thing like that and someone will make you. Jon felt the weight of 100 ghost voices. Robb Stark in a rain-wet camp telling men why their sons must die. Ned Stark's quiet, tireless sense of right that didn't bend for convenience. Only for love, and not then often. The North embedded in him like metal forged into metal. He had sworn to Daenerys in a moment that had been carved out of desperation and a strange gratitude that warmed him still when he looked at her. Maker of her own flame, breaker of chains, the first person to believe him when he said the world would end and that it mattered that it not. He had promised her, but he had not promised meekness. A promise between people who meant to face death together must allow truths to stand tall between them like stones you navigated around each time you passed. He said, I cannot take neutrality when your war will come whether I want it or not. I won't promise to look away when your soldiers burn farmers in the Reach or when surrendering men are shot with arrows beneath a white flag. I will not bind the North to stand aside when wrong walks under a lion banner or a dragon. He saw the flinch. I ask you now to believe me when I tell you a realm cannot be made of pieces that choose their vows like cloaks put on and off at feast and fair. But she looked past him at the ruined dome and all it meant. Wheels break in ways we cannot predict. Perhaps I begin by loosening the spokes that refuse to turn. If the North fights beside me as an ally in this war, if the North stays its hand in southern quarrels afterward, if a great council after the war will decide what form the realm should take, and I mean to call one, then I will not force the North back into chains it wasn't born to wear. Hear me when I say I have no wish to rule those who hate me before they know me. Cost her. He could see it in the tension down the side of her neck. He bowed his head in thanks and felt the old habit of kneeling rise to meet him. He did not kneel. He raised his eyes instead. Then I will fight alongside you, he said, as a king to a queen. Cersei's laugh then was genuine and ugly. Promises and boys' ideals, she said. Very well. You have my word, the Lannisters will remain south. When the dead are dead, you may dress wolves as kings and sing songs of their honor until your throats wear out, so long as they do not trouble us again. She pivoted, robes scything the dust. We are done. We are not, Tyrion said, but he was lying to himself. They were done. Cersei had said what she meant to say only to mean the opposite later, and he knew it, and Jaime knew that he knew it, and all the dead men in the vaults beneath the Red Keep would have known it if anyone had bothered to ask them. When they left the pit, the dragons launched and sent heat down like a blessing and a warning. The shadow of wings passed over Cersei's head. She did not look up. On the old steps, Brienne caught Jaime's arm and spoke with an urgency that never sat easily on her. Snow on her shoulder would have made the moment perfect. Honor is not a word to sharpen on the wrong thing, she said. Sounded like that. He was careful not to let his gaze stray to Cersei when he answered her. He was careful not to let his face say what it had always said when a hard, right thing placed itself in the road in front of High. Like a mountain that had decided to lie down with its face across the path. He told Brienne he would consider what she said. He meant it. Tyrion went to speak with the queen who had tried to kill him with a mountain's hand and the memory of love, because there was nothing else to do. He returned with a shook look and a frown like lines carved with an awl into wood, and the stony feeling in his belly that told him he had been played by someone who could outlie him even when he spoke the truth. He did not share what he had offered her to make her say what she had said. Tasted like poison and memory both. He drank water and wished it were wine, and then wished that he were the man he had been who thought wine could rinse him clean. On the walk back to their waiting ships, Jon trudged with Davos, who said nothing for a long time because there were times when the right thing to do was to let a man hear his own thoughts echo. You could have warned me, Davos said finally, voice low. Not that I'd have told you to hold your tongue, but I'd have had a skin ready for when the arrows started. I would have told you and made it a promise I couldn't bear, Jon said. Better to make it once. Davos said. Better then. You may have just put the first stone in a wall that keeps Sansa safe and the old song's true. You've also put a knife in the belly of your queen's ambition. Jon looked over his shoulder at Daenerys, who spoke with Tyrion and Missandei, Yora a step away, guard dog and man both. The Dragon Queen's face gave nothing, and yet the grief there, independence asked as a gift and received as an insult, that was something Jon could almost taste. She isn't made only of ambition, he said. No, Davos agreed, and neither are you only made of honor. Both of you will have to decide which parts are stronger. Let's pray the dead show up fast enough to keep you too busy arguing to decide. At sea, the wind put ice on their cheeks and salt on their lips, and the ships rocked with a low groan like men too old for their work. In her cabin, Daenerys held the map like it were a friend fallen ill. The mountains mocked with their harmless peaks. The north was drawn small and far away in wine-stained red, and always looked that way to men who measured things by how close they were to port. She closed her eyes and saw a boy's face inside a man's, and the way that face had hardened when he talked of old oaths and wolves. She had grown up on stories of Westeros told to her by an angry brother who forgot to be human when the stories did not flatter him. She had rebuilt those stories from the ground up with every city she'd freed. Each time she had stepped forward, a chain had clattered to the ground, and the sound had become a part of how she heard herself. Now another chain had been put in her hand and told to rust there without biting. She did not know yet if she could let it. Tyrion came to her with a face that would have been the face of a man about to suggest a change of menu to a woman who had just cooked. He spoke carefully. The North must be kept. Their love for him is the only treasure he acknowledges as his. If you try to take it, you'll lose him. If you let him hold it, you may keep both. She pinched the bridge of her nose. You heard me promise to call a council to decide what the realm will be. That was your council years ago. You spoke of it to me when we were on boats between towns with names I cannot remember because they all stank of burnt men and small tyrants. This is that in practice, not in songs. It hurts. You are a Targaryen, Tyrion said with the drunk courage he wore like a silk shirt even when sober. You are a queen who got used to moving pieces until they made what you wanted. You have not been a woman who asks other people to want the things you do. You can be. You must be, or else the thing you want will not be the thing you have. She did not throw. Sansa set the letter down and folded her hands. She had learned to think in the spaces. Between gestures. Prepare the granaries. The first men back from the sea will bring salted fish. Have the Manderleys send carts to every village in their reach and bring in whatever grain is left in fallow fields. Anyone who tries to buy it for their own house at the price of another's hunger will find the price higher than they expected. Tell Lyanna Mormont the cooks will bake thick loaves and not sweet ones until we can again. Kill the songs that ask for wine. We'll need that for the wounded. Arya sat on the windowsill and let her legs swing. You're already ruling an independent North, she said, with or without anyone's words saying so. Sansa thought of the last man who had arranged words like traps around her and who now fed Winterfell with what men fed Winterfell who had overplayed their hand. Snow blew against the glass like a whisper. Words matter, she said. They matter because men die for them. But there are men of the North who would die for bread and fire and a little hope. And that is a better thing than dying to make a promise come true that a queen will break in 3 months. Brienne came in with the step of someone who has news she knows will put weight on another person's shoulders and is willing to carry some of it. Your Grace. The honorific still slid off her tongue with a little surprise. She was at peace with oaths delivered and kept. Riders are back from the gift. They saw blue eyes in the trees. The words fell into the air and froze there. Sansa nodded once and picked up the raven's letter again, even though there was no place in it where she could stab the dead. The wall fell like a door kicked in by a giant in the night. At Eastwatch, Tormund Giantsbane saw the blue fire first as a wrong color on the horizon and not as a weapon. Beric Dondarrion held up a hand as if a man's palm ever had the magic to hold off a storm. The wall had been there all their lives, a white cliff that sometimes glowed and sometimes bruised with weather. It groaned and then screamed. Men ran with bundles, with children, with the single knife that kept a life together in bad years. Ice powdered the air, the kind that cut at eyes and made nostrils stick. Blue fire tore caves into the old cold. It was as if the world itself had been nailed down and was suddenly yanked free. Ravens, black cracks in the sky, leapt south under a storm that seemed to learn as it moved. The dead didn't run toward warmth like animals. They ran toward anything that would make the living remember joy and put it down for easier carrying. They were very good at it. In the great hall at Winterfell, Sansa stood beneath banners and gave orders as neat as a woman teaching children the steps of a dance. There was fear, but the North had always been good at setting fear down and picking it up later as a coat you got used to. Gendry Baratheon, who had found he was good at making metal shapes that made other men feel safer, bent over a barrel and pulled out spears tipped in dark black glass. Arya weighed a dagger in her palm and watched the light die across its edge and thought of a faceless mouth that had tasted salt and ash and learned the names of men and then let them go. When Daenerys rode into the yard on Dragonback, snow blew up in the wake and made frosted ghosts. Men fell back as if a new comet had fallen. She slid from Drogon's back and her skin went gooseflesh beneath winter she had known only briefly in a dragonstone cave, amid a different kind of cold. Her eyes went immediately to Sansa. The two women stopped 2 paces apart, and the air between them hummed with the work it would have to do to carry peace. Your Grace, Sansa said, the title given because it was a tool to cut through something, not because she had warmed to it. Lady Stark, Daenerys said. She looked around at the walls, the old stone that held stories the way moss held drops of water. You've done well with the time given. I had help, Sansa said. It meant 100 things. It meant Brienne, and it meant Arya, and it meant the hall itself, and the wolf standard, and the people who filled the kitchen with work, and the loom with winters that would be wrapped around shoulders in the night when a man woke and thought he had heard his dead father whisper. It did not mean the Lannister queen in the city whose wound would never scab. Food is scarce. Beds are in the cellars and beyond the old library. The crypts will hold those who cannot take a sword. We've lined the stone with lamps. We'll keep them lit. Daenerys's glance flicked, quick as sparrow wings. The crypts, she said. Keep watch there, too. Tyrion had said the same to Jon on the ship. Jon had nodded then, because it sounded like the sort of thing a man who thought too much said when he meant to be useful. Now he let that man's worry become his own. We'll keep them lit, he said. They spoke of troop placement, of fire in trenches and oil poured from walls, and of the way the dead could be made to break when they moved like a tide, and then remembered they had once been soldiers. Grey Worm stood along the table like a spear stuck into a map and measured distances with his eyes. Jaime Lannister came in 2 days later with snow half melted on his cloak, and a look on his face that said he had finally shaken the last of his dreams loose. Brienne met him not with a smile, but with an acceptance that had a smile inside it. The North took him in. Men grumbled and then shouldered it, because there were worse things to swallow. When Bran told Jon in the Godswood that his mother had been Lyanna Stark and his father Rhaegar Targaryen, the gods did not lift up their heads to listen. Snow fell on roots wrapped around stones that had heard 10,000 lies and 1,000 truths and let all of them sink in the same. Sam stood solid and kind, the way he had been when Jon had first seen him trembling in a yard and had known he was worth saving. Jon held the truth like a hot brand in cold hand. It changes nothing, he said, because that was the only thing a man could say when so much changed that the world no longer looked like the world. It changes everything, Bran said, because he spoke like that now. He told Daenerys in a narrow corridor where torches burned and the stone shone with faint grease from the hands that had slid along it for centuries. She did not step back. She did not reach for him, either. It makes you my rival, she said softly, a slight astonishment around the edges, as if surprised to hear the word out of her own mouth. It makes you the heir to what I came to claim. I demanded independence for the North, he said. You gave me terms. I accepted. I don't want your throne. You don't want it until men who love old songs tell you you should, she said. Until they set you in front of a hall and make you believe you can do for them what no one else can. I have never believed that, he said. I have believed I should do what only I can when the moment stands in front of me, and not a moment before. White blew against the window at the corridor's bend and made a sound like a hand running over rough cloth. She stepped closer. You think that if you stay small, the path around you will stay small, she said. It won't. You will have to choose to not walk down roads that open like mouths when they see you coming. He lifted a hand and then let it drop. We are at war tomorrow, he said. Choose me or choose the thought of a throne. I don't know if you can have both, but I know what I can give you now, and it isn't a challenge. She looked at him a long time. I will choose what saves the most lives, she said, which was both a promise and an escape and sometimes the same thing. Night brought the dead. The sky went low and held the cold in its mouth like a grudge. Men moved along walls like ants, remembering they could work together when the hill's shadow covered everything. Melisandre walked out of the dark, cloaked against a winter she had conjured long ago with words she had not known the cost of. She lit the Dothraki rocks, and for a long line of heartbeats you could believe fire would be enough. From the wall, Jon watched those little flames ride away and then go out, one by one, as if a toddler had pinched them with wet fingers. The dead hit like a wave into the unsullied, who stood as if they had been born to be stones. They stabbed and did not cry out when teeth found flesh. On the flank, the North fought as men always have fought when they knew their wives and sons lay behind them and their sisters had knives tucked up their sleeves. Gendry swung a hammer until his arms sang. Tormund laughed because he had learned years ago a laugh was the only sound that made the cold step back. Brienne shouted orders like a bell until her throat bled. Jaime staggered and found his feet and fought. Arya ran along walls and into dark places and came out of them with her mouth set and a curl of hair glued to her forehead by sweat and blood. On the field, Jon mounted regal and became small again in the air where there was no speech for kingship. He and Daenerys hurled flame at the dead until the storm ate the fire and spit back black sparks. Dragons screamed, and the sound felt like a knife in the heart of the night. When he flew through the storm and found the Night King's cold mount and slammed into it in a clash that lit the sky with a new, impossible frostfire, he felt a thrill like a man might feel when he sees the sand after days at sea. He lost it a moment later as ice bit and wood splintered and his world became snow and air. In the Godswood, Theon stood with a bow and a new hardness in his face that fit him better than the old lies had. He shot and moved as if some other hand tugged the strings and drew breath for him. Bran sat beneath the ancient tree and his eyes were wise and tired. The dead came and Theon found he had run out of arrows and then discovered he still had a spear and then found that he did not mind dying here because it would mean he had died as a man and not as a collection of fears strung around a worthless core. When the Night King came into the circle and looked at him as if asking whether flies thought while they buzzed, Theon charged because he was good now at doing the next right thing even if it failed. Jon was on the ground, snow in his mouth, lungs burning, when the cry went up, a sound that cut for being both small and enormous. Arya worked her way through shadows and wind and dead men and living fear and leaped. She dropped the blade from one hand to the other and struck, and the Night King's eyes went from old, cold certainty to surprise, and then to nothing. The army around them broke apart like the crust of a pond in spring. Men stumbled and laughed and cried and looked at one another with belief where moments ago only endurance had been. Dawn came faint and strange over a field that had been churned into something new. The dead lay like stones and then fell further into themselves until nothing was left. The living fell down on old ground and wept or laughed, some of them both. Daenerys knelt over Yora and spoke to him while his breath left him like a tide. He died with a face that said he had managed to die near the thing he loved, which is what men have been trying to do since the first man got tired of his own luck. Lyanna Mormont, who had called the North to rise with a voice that had made men less ashamed, lay beneath a dead giant and would be sung to 1,000 times in halls warm with cider. Beric had found the fire he followed and let it have him. Melisandre walked out past the lines with no cloak and became red on the snow and then nothing at all. The dragons came down with their chests heaving and their wings torn like old banners. Sansa led women and boys and old men out from the crypts shaking, candle stubs guttering in their hands. She had guarded fear with Ca, Lm and knives. There were scratch marks on the stone where dead fingers had licked like cats at the edges of the world, but nothing had come through. Around her, Winterfell breathed softly like a wounded man who would live. Jon found Daenerys in the yard with hands cut from torn leather and an expression made of iron pressed flat. He put a hand over hers. "We're alive," he said, the stupidest and truest thing he had. "For now," she said. She looked at the North's banners. "Now we settle what comes after." They buried or burned for days. The sky went white and then gray and then white again. The smell of fire sank into hair and skin and never left entirely. In a chamber near the heart of the castle, Tyrion spread out a new map and stuck small carved men around the south like peppers on a fish stew. Varys moved pieces with the expression of a man carefully placing laundry to dry, dispassionate and necessary. The war wasn't done. It was only changing shape. The North had survived. That meant it had to decide what to do with survival. Daenerys asked Sansa to meet her in a small solar with frost fogging the windows. The two women sat with a table between them and a strain in the air like a lute string about to break from hunger and be eaten. "I meant what I said in the Dragonpit," Daenerys said. "After this, there will be a council. If it rules to grant independence, I will not fight it. I hear what you said today to your people about food and about keeping each other warm. I hear the North when it speaks through you." Sansa wrapped her hands around a cup she hadn't sipped. "You will find," she said, "that hearing the North is like listening to a river under ice. You can learn the shape of it from the sounds, but it will always be colder than you expect when you step in. I am not afraid of cold, Daenerys said. I am afraid of people who think they own the world because they were born within reach of a chair. We agree then, Sansa said. She looked at the queen's face carefully, as a seamstress studied a stitching she would have to wear for years. But know this, if you mean to cross the neck and take King's Landing with fire because you've been wounded and you think vengeance is a kind of justice, I will not send men with you. I will not ask my people to kill small folk so that you may prove a point to your dead brother. Daenerys sat very still. If I do not, she said, Cersei will kill more of them in the end. She is a fire that spreads if left alone. Then you will have to be the firebreak that leaves houses standing, Sansa said calmly, or else you will be only a fire of a different color. That is a pretty speech, Daenerys said. You think me soft enough to be turned by pretty words. I think you hard enough to live with the cost of not burning a city, Sansa said. They looked at each other across that small table and saw in one another the shapes they loathed and the shapes they needed. Arya watched them from the doorway for a moment with a face that gave nothing. She did not hate the queen. She did not love her. She worked the blade named for death in her palm and thought of the way snow takes boot prints and gives them back as water. Jon stood in the godswood and watched the face in the bark look back without judgment. He asked the old gods what he should do. They said nothing, like always. Davos came to stand beside him and said what his gods said, which was always a version of common sense dressed plainly. You can't hold both things at once forever, Davos said. Her and the North. Sooner or later they'll pull free of your hands, and you'll be left with the rope burnt into your palms. I know, Jon said. You asked for independence in a pit full of enemies, Davos said. That took courage and stupidity. It worked because she let it. If she hadn't let it, we'd be standing in a colder god's wood with more ghosts. She's not your enemy, even when you look at her with love and think you see one. She is my queen, Jon said, and felt the words hit a wall and fall. Davos waited. You can be a man who keeps his word and still chooses differently when the road splits. That's the curse of being the one everyone wants to follow. They'll let you keep your honor as long as it doesn't cost them too much. When the ships left White Harbor headed south under gray sails and gray sky, Jon stood beside Daenerys at the prow of her flagship with the wind pushing their hair back from their faces until they looked both younger and older. They passed fishermen with nets and saw the poverty of peace. Men who had nothing but fish and the chance of a winter not too long. Tyrion drank little and spoke more. Varys watched gulls and men with equal interest and equal skepticism. Missandei wrote letters that would be sent on shore by fast riders when the sea allowed. Euron found them anyway. The Ironborn came out of a fog bank like knives from a sleeve. Black sails, leering prows, the thump of scorpions dragged into place and cocked. Regal, half-heeled, wheeled and screamed and then took a bolt through a wing that tore him sideways in the air. Another slammed into the shoulder joint and stuck. Daenerys's mouth opened in a sound that Jon never wanted to hear again. Not in this life or any. She spurred Drogon forward with a rage that made the air seem thin, and Jon grabbed at her arm and she shook him off as if he had been wind. Only at the last did she draw back, the fog making ghosts of the scorpions, since winning a knife's-edge victory over Fury. Regal hit the water hard and flailed and then sank with a sound like a house collapsing. Men burned on the decks. Missandei was plucked from a board like a child's doll from a cart. The remaining fleet limped. On the black stones of Dragonstone, Daenerys walked the length of the hall and back and did not sit. She would not sit. To sit would be to allow grief to become a blanket she could pull up to her chin and hide under. News fleeted. Euron had captured the girl from Noth. The Golden Company marched. Cersei stood on a wall with a smile like a small knife while her pet shot the sky. Tyrion's counsel and Sansa's warning made a wall around the part of her that wanted to burn a city to its nails. Grey Worm was stone with a hairline crack running down the middle that had Missandei's name written in it. Varys whispered of patience and of small folk. He whispered of the realm as if it were a person whose health could be measured with a hand on a forehead. At the edge of King's Landing, under the city's dull misery of a sky, Daenerys drew up her army. The Golden Company, neat as if painted, stood beyond the gate. The scorpions bristled along the walls like angry cats. Cersei watched from the rampart in that dress like death's own midnight. They parleyed again beneath those walls. Qyburn was her mouth. Tyrion walked as far as he dared and stood a length from the bolt that would kill him if anyone blinked. Missandei stood on the rampart beside Cersei with hands bound and chin lifted. The city held its breath as well as a city could. "Your queen demands your surrender," Qyburn said to Tyrion. "And what do you demand?" Tyrion said. "Continuance," Qyburn said, which was as honest as anything he had ever said. Tyrion raised his eyes to his sister. "You care for your child," he called. The wind shredded the words. "Prove it." Cersei watched him as if he were a beetle making a good show of struggling before the boot. Missandei looked at Daenerys, and in her eyes Jon saw all the miles they had walked together. She spoke a single word without raising her voice. It was the name of fire and of a language learned in chains and turned into the shape of a key. Grey Worm flinched as if someone had stabbed him under a rib. The mountain moved with something like relish. After, Daenerys's face contained nothing that belonged to the living for a long moment. Then she blinked, and the grief came back hot with breath, and with it something else: decision. The next day, Tyrion went to Jon with a look like a man who had decided to refuse his own advice because it had failed him. He spoke quietly. "She will choose the fire," he said. "I have pulled at every thread I could find in her mind. They all lead to Dragonfire. I need you to be the hand that pulls her back." "She has made her choice," Jon said, voice flat with a hard thing he didn't want. "She might listen to me, or she might burn me too." "She won't burn you," Tyrion said, and the blink that followed put that lie to rest. Jon found her before dawn on a headland where the sea tore itself to gray ribbons against black rock. She looked like a figure cut from onyx. He said her name and watched it sink. "You asked for independence," she said. "I gave you a path to it. I have had to ask nothing but the truth from you, and you have given me only the truth. Now I will give you mine. I have no faith that if I take this city with mercy, anyone will ever fear me enough to keep the peace afterward. They will not follow me. They will wait for another man to stand with a good jaw and say a good word, and then they will put a sword in my back or in the back of anyone who sits beside me. You can build fear or you can build something else," Jon said. "But you cannot build both on the same day." Her eyes glittered like wet rock. "You want me to be better than any king who ever lived," she said. "You want me to heal while I bleed. I could do it. I have done it. I am tired of it." And they killed her. She meant Missandei without saying her name because saying her name would cut the thread that held her upright. "Then put your fire on the Red Keep," Jon said after letting that reality sit between them like a brazier until it burned low enough to see over it. "Open the gates. Burn the scorpions and the walls and the things the Lannisters built of men's fear of their own shadows. But leave the city. Leave the people. Take the throne from Cersei and leave the street sellers and the mothers and the boys who run barefoot with stolen apples. If you can do that, you can rule. If you cannot, you will be a fire, and fires always go out, no matter how hot." She quivered with a rage that was half grief and half a pride that had had teeth for years. "You ask me to risk my life and Drogon's to do what? To be called weak." She looked out at the water where gulls fell to feed and rose again with a complaint. "When I was a girl, Viserys told me there was a place where our family had built a city with fire and blood. He said those words like a prayer. I built something else in the east and lost it to men who called me a weak woman and a mad one, often in the same breath. I will not lose again because I was gentle when I should have been strong. You will not win if you are strong in the wrong direction," he said. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was not softness there, but there was a thin rope thrown across to him. "You would have me leave a queen alive inside a palace. I would have you kill a queen and leave a city alive." She nodded once, sharp as a blade being lifted from a whetstone. "I will try," she said. "If I fail, then you will know I was not the queen you wanted. But I will try because you asked me to while standing inside the truth you put in the pit. It was not a promise. It was better, sometimes, a person's bone telling you what the hand would do. When the battle came, it came fast. Drogon rose like a mountain learning to fly. The wall scorpions turned and aimed and spat, and the dragon learned their angles as if he could see the math in the air. Daenerys dove where the bolts could not follow. She came from beneath and from behind. The scorpions burned. The Golden Company watched a wall of fire roll toward them and steadied their lines because steadiness was what they had spent their lives buying from themselves. The gate burst inward. Jon rode with the northern host to tea. He breached and saw soldiers on both sides look up with awe and blank fear at the thing that made them all irrelevant. In the streets, bells began to ring. Tyrion had begged for bells. Varys had nodded like a man writing in a book he had long meant to finish. The bells meant surrender. The bells meant small men with big jobs pulling ropes because their hands were capable. The bells rang. Drogon circled the red keep like a hawk circling a rabbit hole. Daenerys looked down, and through ruins saw Cersei moving across a balcony like a figure of spiteful grace. The dragon screamed, and Daenerys screamed with it, and then turned the fire and made it lie along the walls and across the scorpions and up into the tower where Qyburn kept his bad dreams. The red keep took flame, old stones skewered by new fire until the air over the city danced with heat. Jon held the line that day because lines needed holding. Grey Worm fought like silence. There were moments when men who had thrown down spears lifted them again and images of old sackings shuffled in the air like stained playing cards. But the dragonfire did not fall into the streets. It fell where it would break the spine of a palace. Soldiers died. Civilians ran under arches and huddled in doorways and watched with eyes that had seen too many rulers and thought this one was at least better at killing the right people. Cersei fled with Jaime through corridors that remembered a girl who had wanted more than a skein of gold thread and a husband with a jaw that could cut meat. Wildfire pasted the world with green in a small fury somewhere far below, but neither queen or dragon saw it because there was so much red already. In the caverns beneath the Red Keep, stones cracked like bread crust. Jaime stood with one hand on Cersei's shoulder and felt the old tenderness like a wound that no longer bled but had never healed. He saw slowly that his sister's face had never learned how to be young, not truly, and now would never have to learn to be old. He said nothing clever. The world dropped away around them. He held her because there was nothing else left to do. In the courtyard outside the keep, a company of Lannister men dropped their swords when Drogon landed with his wings held back like sails reefed for storm. Daenerys dismounted and walked over flagstones that smoked. Her face was gray with ash and wind. She stopped beneath a blasted arcade and inhaled and then exhaled. And Jon saw in that breath a woman choosing. The throne room had no roof. The light came in cold and blue though the day was hot. The Iron Throne stood like a wound. Daenerys walked toward it with steps like a woman crossing a frozen river, feeling each stone mean to kill her and refusing to let it. When she set her hand on the thing her ancestor had forged from the mismatched promises of 100 conquered men, she did not sit. She put her hand there and let herself be the woman who had done it. Then she took her hand away. Tyrion came up behind her, steps uncertain in a hall that had been the whole religion of his family and also the instrument of its ruin. He did not pretend to smile. Might as well melt it down into bells, he said, because sometimes words are what stand between a man and the place he's standing, and sometimes they are smoke. She looked at him with eyes that had squeezed tears free and were now dry. We will call a council, she said. We will put the question to lords and ladies and to men who own only 2 goats and a vote that was an idea 5 minutes ago. And we will see if the realm wants to be 7 or 6 or 1, and if the north stays the north and the Dornish go sulk in their sands as kings again. We will see what shape the wheel wants when we take our hands off it. Tyrion felt a hand unclench inside his chest. I will begin sending birds, he said. I warn you. When you ask men what they want, they will tell you any number of things you cannot give and will despise you for the things you can. That is fine, she said. I have killed enough men who forgot the difference between what they wanted and what they deserved. I can learn to live with the opposite folly. The great council that followed met in the dragon's shadow on the very broken pit where Jon had thrown his truth in the teeth of 2 queens. Lords came and women came and men who had never seen the inside of a castle came. 1,000 arguments walked through the dust and multiplied. They ate bad stew and drank beer and listened to men who had wise faces say foolish things, and fools sometimes say a thing so clean it cut everything else away. They spoke of Dornish independence as if it had been something more than a tradition of stubborn dances and fine knives. They spoke of the Iron Islands, where men could not grow enough food to feed themselves when a wind decided to blow the wrong way for a week. They spoke of the Riverlands with a sigh, because the Riverlands always sighed. They spoke of the Vale and of the Reach and of the Stormlands, too much of everything and too little of sense. They spoke of the North. Sansa stood with her hands clasped around something invisible and made no speeches. She said, "We are the North. We will be the North still." And men nodded as if they had heard a song they'd known since childhood and had forgotten the next 2 verses to. Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by a queen who had decided that making new lords was both a toy and a duty she could wield with better grace than any lord who had been born to it, found himself speaking when no one else would. "You cannot make men love a queen by telling them she is better," he said. "You make them love a queen by letting their homes sit where they are without someone coming to set them on fire. If the North being the North keeps a fire from one house, then let it be." Yara Greyjoy, who knew something of fires and of houses that floated and burned just the same, nodded. Dorne stood apart and said it would stand. D apart. Everyone rolled their eyes because Dorne had always done that no matter who was counting. Varys wrote things and burned them and wrote more and burned those, too, making certain his truths went into the air with the smoke where they belonged. In the end, the realm chose as men do when tired. The North would be free. The other kingdoms would be held together by a queen with dragons, and an agreement written down in thick ink with signatures that would become names sung or cursed later, depending on whether the weather that year favored barley or blight. Daenerys was crowned on a day when a sea breeze blew up through the burned streets and made the ash dance like new snow. She wore no crown at the ceremony. She let her hair be. "I am not meant for halls and decisions about bread. I am meant to stand at the places where men fall and hold the line until someone who knows how to make a hall and decide about bread can get the work done." "A noble absence," she said dryly, but her mouth softened as she said it. "A luxury given to men like you because the world needs them. I will not begrudge it. But know this, when I look at you, a part of me counts all the things I could ask you to do with me, and for me that would make a world. And another part looks at the line you draw around yourself and knows I would be a fool to step on it. I am a fool for many things, not for that." He took her hand and held it as if he could share with touch some warmth that stuck even after he had gone. And like most lovers, he thought this meant more than it did and less. "You will be a better queen than any I have seen," he said. "And worse than the queen you want to be. It will be enough. It will have to be." She laughed then, short and sharp, not unkind. "The North taught you to be a poet when you are trying to be a soldier," she said. "Go then. Come when I call or not, as your conscience lets you. Try not to get yourself killed for a song." In the North, Sansa ruled as kings had ruled only when they remembered their mothers. She saw that the small feuds that had made winter harder than it needed to be were put away, and that boys who had stolen salted pork because they were hungry were given work, not a hanging, and that the man who had kept the pork for himself and let boys go hungry was made to feed 10 others. She sat in the solar with Arya and listened to stories of places beyond maps and names beyond lists. She made the North a place men could live in and die without regret in, and no one sang to her, which suited her fine. They lit candles for her long after they stopped lighting them for gods. Arya built a ship and pointed it at a horizon that had the courtesy to move when she moved. She walked the deck at dawn with wind in her hair and felt the first peace she had allowed to share her body since she had been small. She would write sometimes to Sansa, sending lists of strange food and stranger faces, and Sansa would write back lists of grain and marriages and new children and the first snowfalls that came later each year. The letters smelled of smoke and salt. Tyrion died in bed a decade later with a book in his hand and a glass near his elbow and a look on his face that said he had finally thought of the right thing to say to his father and didn't need to say it after all. He had steered a realm, and sometimes straight into rocks, and often into a current that carried without tearing. He had made peace with the part of him that loved the city and the part that hated it. He had learned at last to sleep through the night without waking to count the dead he had made, Daenerys ruled, stumbling and rising, cutting and healing, learning when to ask and when to demand, when to let men have their small tyrannies so she could take from them the big ones. Drogon made new storms in old skies. Regal was a word she carried folded under her tongue like a spell that required silence. She rebuilt the Dragonpit not for chains but for study and wonder. She learned to say no to herself more than she said it to others, which is what rulers must do if they mean to be worth the fear they cause. Jon went where the world needed a man with a sword and a face that told other men it was possible to survive. He ranged along the new gift of land beyond where the wall had been and found that the wildlings had a dozen names for every kind of snow and only one for peace, and they loved the one and learned the other more slowly. Ghost ran with him, and sometimes ahead of him and sometimes behind, and in that shifting he found a contentment he had not expected. He came south when Daenerys called in the autumn to settle a border dispute in the Riverlands before it could become a war, and he left in the spring because the bow. Redurlans had learned, for the moment, that a war would steal their seed corn and their daughters and not much else, and decided it was too high a price for a bit of a bank along a river that would run where it liked anyway. In late years, when a child asked why the North was not like the South, old men and women would say, "Because a man in a ruin asked for it and a queen who could have burned the world let him have it." And the child would nod and then run off to play in snow and mud and forget the story until it had teeth and came back to bite him into understanding. The Dragonpit grew greener year by year. Vines found purchase. The new dome cast a kinder shade. Children climbed on the old benches and dropped figs in the dust and were scolded. Sometimes, when the sun was a coin ready to be spent, Daenerys would walk down into the bowl and listen for the echo of a voice telling truth into a dangerous room. And she would think of a boy who had become a man while clinging to a mountain in a storm and who had asked only one thing of her that she had not wanted to give, and given it, and they had both survived it. She would smile and toss meat to a creature that could set a city alight with one long breath and watch it catch the morsel as carefully as a nursemaid picking burrs out of a child's hair. She would think of the wheel and her hand upon it, and how sometimes the best thing to do after breaking was to learn not to force a shape on anything at all. And the ravens still circled overhead, black commas in a sentence written across the day, pausing, then continuing, then gone, as if the sky itself had put down a story for a while and meant to pick it up again when it had breath.